All right, hi guys. So I am going to make this lecture, part of lecture 2, into a series of 4 videos. The first one will be the longest, and then they'll all be pretty short. This is just so that I have an easier time uploading it into YouTube, and maybe it'll make it easier on your computers too. I don't know. But anyways, what I want you to do to start is actually take your piece of paper and fold it in half. You don't actually have to fold it in half if you don't want to, but just kind of like recognize that we're going to be writing into columns as we go. So if you don't fold in half, no worries, but just be aware we'll be kind of following this format. So in lecture 1, we kind of learned about the basics of anatomy, and we were looking at all of those relative position terms and anatomical terms and body cavities. And so now we're going to be more so looking at like what is inside those structures or making up those structures and those organs and those body cavities. And so in the beginning of these notes, you started looking at the levels of organization. And these are super key to know before we get into any body systems, because every single body system is made up of organs, and every single organ is made up of tissues. Almost every single organ is made up of actually 4 types of tissues. There are some exceptions, but these 4 tissues that we're actually going to go over today are found in almost every single organ, all 4 of them. And then those tissues are made up of cells and so on and so forth. And so as we talked about in the very beginning of lecture 1, structure matches function. So if we can understand and really practice these 4 types of tissues and what each of their functions are, as we go into each organ system and each organ itself, when you see these tissue types appear, it will really help with your understanding of what they do. Because tissues can sometimes seem really abstract. We know cells from bio and we understand organs, but tissues are just kind of there. And so that's why we're going to practice them now. So you can write at the very top, unit 1, lecture 2, and maybe even throw the date on there, so it'll be 8/20 when you guys are doing this. And then the next thing I want you to do is title it tissues. And we'll be looking at the 4 major tissue types. And for each, we'll also be looking at their functions and their locations. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure my camera is recording. It looks like it is. Okay, so from there, what I want you to do is start off with the number 1. And we are going to start out with our first major type of tissue in this video, called epithelial tissue. Now, I am going to just use black pen, but I would recommend maybe doing each tissue type in a different color if you have colored pens, or I don't know, something like that, if color coding things helps you. So I'll just go with black for epithelial, and we're gonna start off with the location of each. So like I said, each of these 4 tissues is found in almost every single organ in the body. There are some exceptions. But for epithelial, this is one of the most widespread tissue types. It pretty much covers every organ and every body cavity. So it's really all over the place. And therefore, it's going to have a bunch of different structures itself, or cell types that can make it up. That's why this one's the longest. So we'll start by writing location, and I'll put that right here. So as I just said, it's widespread throughout the body. It covers organs. So when I say covers organs, is like surrounding the outside of organs, like the outer layer of them. But it also forms the inner lining of organs too. And not only organs, but body cavities as well. So let's zoom in on that for you all. So we talked about the ventral body cavities and the dorsal body cavities. You had the vertebral cavity and you had the cranial cavity on the dorsal side, and the abdominal and pelvic and thoracic on the ventral side. And so when we say body cavities, that's what we are referring to. Those cavities, those areas which kind of separate different portions of the body, are lined with epithelial tissue. So now let's take a look at their function. So you can write that one down below. And so there's a good variety of functions for epithelial tissue, but their major functions are to protect and form barriers. They also are going to secrete and also absorb. So when I say that word secrete, we're talking about things like sweat. We do find these in the pockets of sweat glands and other glands in the body. When I say secrete, I mean secrete things like hormones or enzymes or even mucus in a lot of those respiratory organs. Even secreting just like lubricants, so that when organs are next to each other in those body cavities, they're not rubbing up and kind of creating friction and discomfort in the body, but instead they're moving past each other nice and easily. And when I say this word absorb, we're talking about substances like nutrients in the digestive system, those villi in the small intestine absorbing all those nutrients from the food you eat, and in the large intestine absorbing water and vitamins, so all of that. So cells and tissues in this epithelial tissue category will do all of those things. They're in charge of gas exchange as well. So a bunch of different types of functions. But again, protect and form barriers, secrete and absorb kind of encompasses all of that. And any of those examples I just said, you're more than welcome to write down if they help you. I want to add one more thing to location. Let's go back up there and just add pockets of glands, because they are in the pockets of glands too, which kind of makes sense, because if you think about like sweat glands, and if you think about sebaceous glands, which we'll talk about in our next unit, or even glands in the digestive system, they're going to be secreting enzymes, secreting sweat, secreting various substances in those little pockets. That's usually what glands are for, secreting things. So that's a good thing to add. All right, so now we have location and function. So let's go over to this other column. And here's where we are going to look at the types of cells that make up epithelial tissues, and also how they're arranged or how they're organized. So we'll write types of cells / organization. So we are going to go through 6 types of cells and how they are organized. I'm going to have you write down a few terms just briefly to start that will help you, and we'll see these kind of repetitively throughout. So first of all, when we're classifying epithelial tissue, or the cells that make it up, we are going to be classifying it in terms of how many layers of layers of cells the tissue is made up of, and also the shape of the cells that make up the tissue. So in terms of layers, we have 2 words. We have simple, which equals 1 layer, and we have the word stratified, which means there's 2 plus layers, 2 or more. Sorry, there we go. And then in terms of shape, we have 3 terms we could use. So in terms of shape, we are going to have squamous. I always want to say squamous. It just looks like squamous, but it's pronounced squamous. So squamous, which means flat. And I always think of like squamous kind of looks like the word squish. So they're flat and they're squished. They're not actually squished, but they look like they're squished. We have another term, which is cuboidal. And I'm sure you can guess it means cube-shaped. And finally, we have columnar. which, as again you could probably guess, means column-shaped. Okay, so we'll see these terms quite a bit. But they're good ones to practice because as long as you know those, you can kind of figure out what the term or the type of cell being described or tissue means. So let's go through a couple examples of cells and how they're organized. So to start, I'm going to write the letter A. This is our first example, and we're going to start with simple squamous. And I'm actually going to add the word cells on there so you know that we're drawing the cells that make up the tissue. Remember, when there's more than one cell, when there's many cells, that's what constitutes a tissue. So we actually kind of are drawing tissues, but we're drawing the cells that make them up. So simple squamous cells are going to be simple, which means one layer, and squamous, which means flat. So we will draw one layer of flattened cells. You know when you're like a little kid, or even now, and you draw eyeballs, and you kind of make that shape. I didn't do the best job, but you almost want to make like the eyeball shape, how it kind of goes like, you know, closes up on the sides, but is rounded in the middle. And then in each of those, we are going to draw a nucleus. So it really does look like an eye. So there's our simple squamous cells. And these are going to be found in the lungs, for example, specifically in the alveoli of the lungs. And the alveoli, if you remember from bio, are those grape-like structures at the end of the lungs where gas exchange occurs between the circulatory and respiratory system. So oxygen is going to be leaving the alveoli and heading into the blood vessels, and carbon dioxide is going to be leaving the blood vessels and heading into the alveoli. So if we have gas exchange, we want a large surface area, number one, and we want really thin walls and thin layers so that can happen quickly and efficiently. Obviously, you want to breathe efficiently and not slowly. And so the alveoli are structured just like that with simple squamous cells to do their function efficiently. Structure matches function. Okay, letter B, I think we have room to squeeze it here. We are going to do stratified squamous cells. And hopefully in your head you're saying, okay, stratified means 2 or more layers, squamous means flat. So we're going to be looking at the same thing we just drew, but a couple layers of it. So I am going to draw 3 layers of squamous cells to make them stratified. And they're really tightly packed together. And you can draw their nuclei right in the center. There. Okay, and so an example of a place you would find stratified squamous cells, which we'll actually see very shortly as the next lecture is about the integumentary system, is in the skin, right? So here we're seeing this protection function coming in and barrier function coming in for our epithelial tissues because we have a nice thick layer. If you look at your skin, right, it's not thin, you don't touch it and pop right through it like a single cell would, but instead we have a nice thick protective barrier formed. For letter C, we are going to go into a different shape, but again, we'll look at simple and stratified versions of this shape of cell. So for letter C, we will be looking at cuboidal. So let's write simple cuboidal. And here, it's just like what it sounds like those little icebreakers you see at the grocery store, or even like ice cubes, but more cube-like than even ice cubes or Rubik's cubes you could think of, or your cubital, like your elbow, cube-like. And so we're going to add our little nuclei in here. And where we're going to find these is, for example, is in the nephron of the kidney. So the nephron of the kidney is like the structural unit or the basic building block of it. Nephron of kidney. So we won't get to talking about the kidney till the end of the year, but we'll get there. So again, hang on to this. We'll refer back to these notes quite a bit. And then from there we will look at, surprise, surprise, stratified cuboidal cells. Yeah, okay, So for stratified cuboidal, we would have something, we can do maybe 2 layers of these to show they're stratified. But the same deal, we'll add our nuclei in. Again, we are drawing individual cells here, but together they make up a tissue. And so if we were looking at this, we would be seeing epithelial tissue that's made up of stratified cuboidal cells. If that makes sense. Or it's stratified cuboidal epithelial tissue, you could say. Kind of gets tricky with that terminology. That's why I'm not really sure if I like the fact that I have the word cells here. So maybe we'll just get rid of that, because we're drawing cells that make tissue. So get rid of that word cells. Sorry to make you go back, but yeah, we'll just get rid of that. Okay, so where we will find these, and we'll actually see these in our next lecture, or one of the next few lectures, when we talk about the skin, is in our sweat glands. So we'll see that secretion function coming in with these stratified cuboidal cells. All right, and our final row, we are going to look at our last shape, columnar. So we have simple columnar. And here, like it sounds, they're very column-like, like pillar-like. And the nuclei are actually really in a line. So make sure those are nice and in a line. I'm going to just draw, they don't always have these, but the example we're going to discuss here in a second has these called villi. So I'm going to draw some villi here. You could have cuboidal cells with villi as well. And these are actually called microvilli, but that's okay. So they're called microvilli, side note. But so these are column shaped, and they are found in the small intestine. So these have a nice large surface area with the microvilli added on, and they're going to be really in charge of absorbing nutrients in the small intestine. So that's their function there. And finally, letter F, we have a type of cell called pseudostratified cells. And if you've heard of pseudostratified, you've never heard of pseudostratified most likely, but pseudo, if you've heard of the word pseudo, it kind of means fake. So they kind of look like they're columnar cells, but they're not quite. And so the difference here is with the nuclei. Okay. So it's only a single layer of cells, but the location of the nuclei is going to make these cells look like there's more than one layer. And sometimes they're even squished kind of inward, so they're a little warped. But they really do, when you see them under a microscope, and we'll check those out in a lab, look like they're more than one layer, but it's fooling you because it's only one layer of cells. So we will talk about these when we get to the respiratory system, because they are found in the trachea, which is also known as the windpipe. It's that long tube connecting the pharynx, your throat, back of your throat, to your bronchi, out into your lungs. And if you remember it from like rat dissections, if you ever did those, usually that's like something people can always find with those cartilage rings. It always stands out. So yeah, okay, I'm gonna stop this video there and then look out for the next one to watch after this.